The Central Bank of Nigeria said it will sanction banks assisting foreign firms and other institutions that are not fully working in connivance with the central bank and are operating in aversion to what the central bank wants. Now, it stated in its guidelines for the regulation of representative officers of foreign banks in Nigeria, signed by the Director of Financial Policy and Regulation Department, Mohammed Musa, that any CBN regulated entity found to be assisting, supporting, harboring, or facilitating the presence and or operations of an unlicensed international financial institution in Nigeria shall be liable to severe sanctions, including suspension or revocation of their banking license. Now, according to the guidelines, representative offices of foreign banks serve an important purpose of showcasing the brand and services of its parent company. It could also stimulate foreign direct investments to the host country by connecting capital to various investment opportunities. It is in view of these that the Central Bank of Nigeria issued the guidelines to specify the requirements for the licensing and operations of approved representative offices of foreign banks in Nigeria. So this morning, joining us to discuss this is Oladipo Ajayi, Head Fixed Income and FX, Chapel Hill, Denham Securities. It's nice to have you join us, Oladipo, on the show.
Yes, good morning. It's nice having me on this show this morning.
Now, to start with, the operation of unlicensed foreign firms within Nigeria's business environment seems to show how porous it is. And for a country at the vanguard of Africa's economy, does it mean that Nigeria is not sophisticated enough to preempt and detect these kind of infiltrations before they fester? Or do things like this actually obtain in developed climes?
I think, firstly, I think we need to actually put the blame on the table of the central bank governor. Because if situations like this is actually occurring in our clime, I think it's not actually acceptable where you have a foreign bank actually operating in Nigeria without duly registering with the Apex Bank. I think it's not actually acceptable, and I think there's a lot of porosity in that angle that the CBN needs to actually quickly fix. Because one of the things I think that will actually lead to is that it will lead to porosity of FDI inflows, because it simply means that most of the funds will not likely come in directly from the central bank, because it means that those banks can actually just move funds through their representative office in Nigeria, and at the end of the year execute whatever they want to do within the country without the central bank being able to account for the actual level of inflow. So now the central bank mentioned that, okay, at the Q4 last year, that we had about $750 million inflow from FDI. Are we sure that is the exact figure? Because in as much that CBN cannot account for all the offices of most of these foreign banks in Nigeria. So I think the CBN needs to quickly work on this and actually ensure that everything are in order.
That we're having issues of illicit financial flows and money laundering, which of course is a common occurrence with banks all over the world. Now, looking at this latest move by the Central Bank of Nigeria to sanction banks, do you think it will be effective enough in actually dealing with this malpractice?
Yeah, I think one thing that just like what CBN government said is that they will likely sanction banks, which may likely lead to withdrawal of some of these bank licenses. And I think what the CBN just needs to do is just to actually take action against one bank, and every other one will actually fall in line. Because as we see, just like what you mentioned, this could easily aid repatriation of funds without the knowledge of CBN. This can also lead to money laundering without the NFIU being able to actually track, without the CBN being able to actually account for some of these funds that actually live in our system. So, like I said, the CBN need to actually take a decisive action on any herring bank. Now that it's already out there and CBN has sent warning to all banks, what is expected of all the banks is actually to all unite to ensure that things that they actually tidy up their books to ensure that most of these foreign banks are actually adequately registered with CBN so that they can operate accordingly as it has been specified by the CBN regulations. So any herring bank should be punished, and I think that is very necessary as we speak.
Oladipo, you're saying that the Central Bank of Nigeria should take actions and look at these underdealings by these financial institutions. But then we'd like to understand what are the parameters to even determining if a bank is backing an unlicensed foreign firm? And what do you think that the Central Bank will be looking out for in determining if these institutions and these companies are engaging in financial malpractice? What are those issues or parameters or those things or factors, as the case may be, that you think the CBN will be considering while going on this fact-finding mission?
Yeah, I mentioned when I was responding to your first statement that the key thing, first thing you look at, are we sure the data that the central bank has been showing out are actually about FX into the outflow, those data are actually correct. We are not sure as we speak now if things like this are actually happening. It means that there can be outflow that is not recognized in the book of central bank. It means that there can be inflow that is not recognized in the books of central bank. And I think one of the ways that the central bank can actually get using the body is to actually, first and foremost, find foreign banks are actually operating in this currency as we speak currency, and look out to ensure that whether they are adequately registered. If not, then they need to now investigate and look at which of those banks are currently transacting on behalf of most of these foreign banks that have offices in Nigeria, but they are not adequately registered with the central bank. If this is done, I'm sure the CBN just needs to send their inspectors and their auditors around banks to actually look into their books and find if there's any erring bank in that direction, and quickly put them in line with what is expected of them. So it is not even so difficult for me. I just think that it means that the CBN has not been focusing on the right thing, and it means that CBN has not been so much expecting the books of some of those banks, because they have been doing it adequately before now. We don't need to get a level of this level where we now have to now start sending general warning to hold the banks in a public place. And I think that another thing that we also need to do in such a time like this is that we know that the country is currently starved of effort, and it means that we must be able to actually account for every penny that comes into the economy and that leaves the economy. And in such a time like this, a time where the central bank needs to buckle up and also ensure that all banks are in line with their vision to ensure that the FX market generally and actually is actually well satisfied.
All right. Now, the idea actually is to protect the Nigerian banking industry from potential risks associated with foreign firms operating without proper licenses. That's according to what the central bank has said. So what are these risks actually, if we were to put them in proper terms? And could it have a far-reaching implication on Nigeria's financial institution from an international perspective?
Yeah, it could, because imagine a Nigerian bank currently transacting with maybe an international bank that is not registered in Nigeria, and currently their transaction is done well reported to the Central Bank of Nigeria, and it means that maybe Nigeria bank is actually indebted to such international banks. And you know, one thing is exchange rate risk is key currently as we speak, and I'm sure the Central Bank is looking into the books of all banks to ensure that they are in line with us, because any depreciation in the value of the currency will actually affect the financial sector very much. And that's why the central bank keeps actually carrying out stress tests on all the banking sector to ensure that there's stability in the banking sector. If you have looked at what has happened to other banks, international banks like Silicon Valley, like the Signature Bank, you understand the need that there's a lot of risk currently in the financial sector. And this is a very good time that the CBN needs to be on most of those banks, so that because over time CBN has been giving the work on the Nigeria financial system, and you don't want to actually lose guard to ensure that to a situation whereby something will not happen and people will now take you back to your word, your word of affirmation that you have given the market about Nigerian banks, that that they actually great banks and that everything is going on very well. And so the CBN currently this is the right time for them to actually buckle up around that.
All right, but some people are actually raising concerns about some foreign institutions that may operate within Nigeria's business space, but then may not have a fiscal office in Nigeria. So do you think that this particular directive will be all-encompassing? Do you think it will be able to cover? And do you think that CBN scope will also be able to probe further to all these institutions and all these financial institutions also that may have a virtual presence, but then not a physical presence within Nigeria's business environments?
So if they don't have a fiscal presence, I don't think that should be a great deal, because what that simply means is that the bank is just directly a customer of a Nigerian bank. You understand what I mean? So it does not necessarily mean that they are operating within the client. And if you understand what the CBN says, that some of these banks, they are actually even collecting deposits and actually granting loans in the system. And that is outside what the issue of a bank that actually doesn't have office, a fiscal office in Nigeria, but operates through a Nigerian bank. So when you don't have a fiscal office in Nigeria and you operate through a Nigerian bank, it's as good as saying that you are just like a client to a Nigerian bank. And we've had a situation whereby most of Nigerian banks have corresponding banks. And for example, that you see most of Nigerian banks, when they want to execute transactions, maybe in the US or in the UK, they use most of their correspondent bank, maybe like UK, US, Sanction, and the like, to actually execute their transaction. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. But the main thing is that when you have an office in Nigeria and you do a banking service like collecting deposits, doing transactions, but yet you are not fully registered with Central Bank of Nigeria, but you operate through a Nigerian bank, that is actually not acceptable.
Oladipo, you have hammered on the issue of accountability and transparency on the part of these institutions. Now, do you also trust the CBN to follow through with the directive it has given? Because it's also said that this is a broader effort at promoting greater transparency and accountability on protecting customers, that is the consumers, from financial fraud, and of course protecting the banking industry. And we know that over time you have institutions who have situations like this, and they go about developing some other ways to circumvent the process, as it were. So do you think that the CBN has the scope and the capacity to follow through and to also not fizzle out or be compromised?
I think the CBN has the capacity, and I think they has what it takes to actually control this. Because whatever happened in the financial system, I think the first thing, the box actually stopped at the central bank door, because they're actually the regulator of the market. So as we speak, I think the central bank has what it takes, because there's no how, most of those banks, there's no how they can operate in Nigeria without whether operating directly through their offices or operating within through a Nigerian bank. Because the way you can reach the customer is either you have an office where the customer can actually operate with, or you have a bank like a Nigerian bank that you can actually operate through. Of course, I understand the world currently about the fintech world where you don't need to, you can actually transact and do everything online. But at that particular point, the central bank can actually disengage themselves from that and help educate the populace that actually operating with some of these financial institutions that don't have offices in Nigeria and not currently working with any Nigerian bank that you cannot pinpoint to, means that you are your risk actually going through that route. So if anything actually crystallizes one way or the other, the CBN has been able to absorb itself of any blame at that particular point, because they actually make pronouncements to the general public of the reasons why they need to actually run away from some of these institutions. So I think the CBN has what it takes, and that I think another thing they also need to do is find a way to continue to actually educate the general public on the reasons why their transaction has to be with banks, or directly with Nigerian banks, or with foreign banks that has offices in Nigeria and actually registered with Central Bank of Nigeria. And the next step of this CBN for me, to actually find a way to actually publish the names of international banks that have offices in Nigeria and are duly registered with the Central Bank of Nigeria. With that, at least anyone that's actually transacting with some of those banks knows that, so this particular bank that I've been transacting with means that, they've not actually been following the due process. So I need to either discontinue my transactions with them or need to actually find a way to actually advise them to actually go through the right route so that we can continue transacting business.
All right, finally, Oladipo, before I let you go, looking at it on the flip side, are there any potential risks or any sort of drawbacks to this particular sanction or directive by the Central Bank of Nigeria? Because some financial experts have raised concerns as to the fact that these directives, as the case may be, might be overly harsh and it might be stringent or too stringent for foreign investors or other institutions, companies, as it were, that may want to come into Nigeria's business space and operate, as it were, and it might just deter them. So do you think we should be looking at other concerns as regards CBN's crusade?
I think the drawbacks cannot be compared with the impact. The impact actually, the risk actually crystallizes. The drawback is just like what you mean, that people might find it very difficult to actually go through that process, register with Central Bank. So what the Central Bank needs to now currently do is that to actually make it very easy for people to actually come to actually register their institution in Nigeria and all those things, create an easy environment to do business and things like that in the financial sector. But if you want to look at it from the fact that this may actually discourage some of these institutions from coming to Nigeria, I think it will be better that way than for you then to actually operate in Nigeria, and at the end of the day, we now get to a situation whereby there's financial crisis in the market, or there's a point whereby investors have to lose their money just because the Central Bank did not do the due diligence. Another particular point in time, you and I know that everybody will put the blame on the Central Bank of Nigeria and also on the federal government of Nigeria.
All right, thank you so much, Oladipo. It's all about accountability and being responsible for whatever kind of business you're bringing into a particular climate environment. And that's also important for people to note that whether virtually or physically, you should be able to let people know the brand or the nature of the business you're bringing in so that when there's an issue, people know where to go to. Thank you so much, Oladipo, for joining us. Now, the CBN's move to sanction banks backing unlicensed foreign firms highlights the importance of promoting greater transparency, accountability, and regulatory oversight in the banking industry, as we've established during the course of the show. Now, it is hoped that this measure will now help protect the industry from potential risks and, of course, promote its long-term stability and growth. Let's go on another short break. When we return, we'll look at the business stories that we have for you from the international scene.